Let's bring in my colleague Chris Uhlmann, our political contributor. Chris, lots to talk about. I want to start though in the United States, the White House and at the UN. First, I'll play our viewers this exchange between the President and Emmanuel Macron, where he basically corrected the President on something, and then we'll talk about this UN vote that also took place overnight. Have a look.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be done at the end of the day and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
So that was quite a polite intervention, but he sort of corrected the President. And then they're not on the same page there. The President Macron saying that there's got to be a peace, but not a weak agreement, not a weak peace. And then at the United Nations, the US voted with Russia against a condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Where is Europe at? Where is the US at when it comes to this?
Well, we're living at a point of inflection in world history at the moment. We are seeing an epic shift in the way that the United States deals with its allies. Certainly since the Second World War, it's basically thrown a security blanket over Europe. It's not prepared to offer that anymore unless Europe pays more for its defence. I'm not sure that it's prepared to offer it at all anymore, and certainly the Europeans are worried about it. It's an active debate in Germany at the moment where the United States will stand when it comes to NATO. They're talking about getting their nuclear defence from France and the UK now, as Germany looks to shore up itself. Nobody believes that if Putin gets a settlement in Ukraine, which essentially gives him a large amount of territory, that will be the end of what they want to do. There seems to be no prospect now that Ukraine would be part of NATO, and it's simply a lie to say that Ukraine started this war. It was a war of aggression by Russia. That was plain for anyone who was paying attention. So the United States is changing the way that the world runs in real time, and now the rest of the world will try and have to keep up with what that means. And I'll end on this point on that. What does it mean for Australia? Because we've just seen some gunboat diplomacy from China just off our coastline. We have not seen that. The one threat that Australia's always tried to stop is a threat to the east coast of Australia, and now that's what we have. So
as the US is pulling back, China's leaning in.
Well, if the world's going to be split up into spheres of influence, and what we now see from the United States, it's desperate to have the Western Hemisphere, Greenland, Canada, United States, Panama Canal, all the way down to Argentina. The United States wants to shore up its sphere of influence in the West. We're in the Eastern Hemisphere. And if Russia gets to take Europe, then that's the way that the world will be divided. And China just sent us a big message, which is you're all on your own down here and there is nothing that you can do about it.
With this UN vote, as you say, it's an inflection point. That vote in itself is quite extraordinary, voting against your allies of generations, not just years, and voting with a despot who invaded their neighbour. It is just extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and it overturns essentially 70 years of what we've seen with the United States and the Soviet Union and now Russia.
Is there this four-dimensional chess? I mean, I can't read it at the moment if there is going on. This Trump's, supporters say, oh, he's playing four-dimensional chess. No one really understands it.
Some of the things that I think that Donald Trump is doing are really quite good and overdue. I think that, but some of the other things that he's doing, I think, are going to be catastrophic. And the idea that he is some way 4 or 5 steps ahead of the game, that there's some grand strategic bargain underfoot, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But if that's the case, then what he has to do to emerge is with a peace with Ukraine, which is a defendable one, which means that Ukraine doesn't get the Russians coming over their border in 4 or 5 years' time looking for more territory. That peace will need to be secured. And if you give Putin essentially what he wanted, if he's seen to get a victory out of this, then that emboldens all other despots, and particularly Xi Jinping.
You wouldn't want to be in Taiwan.
No, and you'd have to say now that there is bucklish chance that the United States will be in a game to try and defend Taiwan. that they would simply, that they're not going to be there for them. And I think Xi Jinping knows that.
Yeah, that's right. And let's bring the focus closer to home. The pre-election season, but it feels like the campaigning's already underway. A massive bulk billing push that Peter Dutton was clever to neutralise quickly.
Yeah, he was, because he knows that Medicare is the scare campaign that's worked for the Labor Party in the past, particularly under Bill Shorten. But I've got to say, both major parties now are basically saying that they really don't have any idea how they're going to pay for this. I see that Peter Dutton is saying that he'll pay for it by getting cuts to the public service. Again, I'll believe that when I see it, because the Australian public service is much harder to cut than the US public service, which they're going through with a hot razor at the moment. But I think that there is enormous fat in the Australian public service. Like, why does Australia have the highest paid public servants in the world? Where is the evidence that we're getting value for money? And when the Prime Minister talks about this coming out of frontline services, well, there aren't any real frontline services. There are no nurses and doctors that we're talking about there. Where is the evidence that we're getting value for money out of the Australian public service? I think it is high time that we looked at the Australian public service root and branch, and started with cutting the secretary's pay in half. You know that the head of the Australian Public Service Australia gets more than $1 million a year, more than 3 times what the White House Chief of Staff gets. Try and get your head around that.
The polls have the coalition in front. Is that your sense at the moment?
Look, again, mate,
It's a moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And if you believe particularly the Resolve poll, it has the Labor Party's prime vote on 25. Well, that's catastrophic.
That seemed an outlier, though.
It does, but then the others have them on around about 31% of the primary vote, which is again a notch down from where they were at the last election. You'd have to say, what's the most likely outcome at the next election? A hung parliament, with the Labor Party looking to try and form government as the first most likely thing. And then if the swing is on, it may well be Peter Dutton looking to form a minority government, but you wouldn't want that government. If I was Peter Dutton, I'd give it to Anthony Albanese and say, have a nice 3 years. See you in 3 years' time.
Yeah, that's right. And he's here for he's certainly here for a long time, you know, that long period. He's been here like a veteran like Anthony Albanese. He knows how difficult those hung parliaments can be, particularly when you've got a crossbench, which looks like it is going to grow in size even more at this upcoming election.
Yeah, what we've got now is a very large crossbench, and what we're seeing is the major parties now basically fighting on both sides of that, trying to get enough to cobble together a government. Now, again, we're seeing epic shifts in Australia. The 2 major parties both have seen a collapse in their primary vote. So we are living at an inflection point in history. Things are changing. They're changing quite dramatically. Australia will become a more difficult place to govern, but we will most likely after the next election have a government which will find it very difficult to get any of its program through the lower house and particularly the upper house.
Yeah, indeed, that's right. Nuclear would struggle to get through a Senate where the Greens had the balance of power, and
well, we're going to have a lot
vice
of
versa.
problems. We're going to have an enormous amount of problems on energy, because we basically have an energy illiterate crossbench and an energy illiterate government at the moment. So we will end up in a position where no energy projects will get ticked off, and we will essentially deindustrialise Australia. We're on that pathway already. So my great concern is that as the world is changing, and as other countries will be looking to use all the resources that they have at their disposal to stay rich, Australia will make itself poor by not using the resources that we have under our feet.
Chris Uhlmann, thank you.
Thanks.
See you next week. Appreciate it.